Yes, it is time! It's time for everyone to gather around as I share a very special part of my video game lineage. I love Kirby. It's seriously one of my favorite Nintendo franchises. But you're all clever viewers, so you're probably asking yourselves why I'm not making a video on Mario or Zelda or Pokemon, one of those huge iconic franchises with huge devoted fan bases. Well, you see, Kirby was my introduction to the wonderful, wonderful world that is video games. You see, I got into gaming a bit late in the Game Boy Advance era, so for a long time I had no idea what I was doing. I was just buying mediocre licensed bullshit, and I was pretty happy with it. But then, almost by chance, Kirby came into my life. Pretty boring story, actually. I had a Game Boy Advance, my cousin had a Game Boy Advance, he had a Kirby game, he let me play the Kirby game. I developed a mild obsession with finding my own copy. But then I got the game and I really started playing. Staring at that dark little screen, I caught a glimpse of worlds beyond my babby-level comprehension. Worlds of color and originality, of serenity and chaos, and most importantly, of kick-ass game design choices. Things were never the same again. How could they be? I owe Kirby a debt for making me love Nintendo and making me love video games. And today, I repay this debt. That makes me sound humble. The truth is that I want an excuse to gush about something I like for 10 minutes and squeeze as much entertainment value as I possibly can out of this fanboying. I'm not going to talk about all the games, I'm not going to do a top 10, I'm not going to do any kind of in-depth review. I'm doing it my way. The right way. So let's start things off right. Let's start at the beginning. Most people know about Kirby's Dream Land, so I won't bore you with the trivia. The food's been stolen, so it's Kirby's job to get it back by eating food. I mean, the first game, the first game in this series is themed around eating. If in case it's not obvious, I'm a pretty big fan of food myself. So it shouldn't come as any surprise that this is a game after my own heart. The game is nothing groundbreaking, but the use of inhaling enemies and flying as game mechanics made it fresh, unusual, and memorable. A good start, that's for sure. A year passes, and Nintendo's wildly successful NES is on its last legs. The Super NES is already out, and its revolutionary graphics and sound have all but invalidated the NES. Surely, releasing a game on this outdated console would be business suicide, right? Right? Well, yeah. Oh, this is motherfucking Kirby's Adventure! That's right, one of the best sequels of the era came out on a console that had less than a year to live. Don't give me that look. I know best sequel of the era is kind of an extravagant title to give to such a low-profile game, but you gotta remember what it was like at the time. I mean, I wasn't alive, so I don't remember, but that's irrelevant. NES-era sequels were all about crazy experimentation, and while this isn't necessarily bad, there's such a thing as too much experimentation. Whereas games like Zelda 2 completely flipped Zelda 1's gameplay on its head, angering many fans, Kirby's Adventure took what made Kirby's Dream Land unique, blew it into 1,000 pieces, injected each individual piece with the tears of the rainbow goddess, and reassembled it into a unified whole through use of sweet, ancient sex rituals. I just think it's a pretty good game. But I can't explain just by yelling at a camera, so let's look at some gameplay! So the most obvious change is that Kirby's inhaling powers can now be used to eat enemies and copy their abilities, giving him one of over 20 power-ups creatively titled Copy Abilities. The inhaling mechanic in Kirby's Dream Land was cool, but it was also sort of boring and repetitive. They fixed those problems in the best way possible without losing the original spirit of the gameplay style. Wow! Incredible! And the bizarre thing is that they got so many of these dozens of abilities right in their first try. Sword feels so good! Shoo shoo! Yeah! I was born to do this! There is a little design flaw in the fact that you get an ability knocked out of you in one hit, but you can overcome that by exploiting some devious glitches. People like glitches, right? Let's show some glitches. If you go into a stage you've already beaten and you pause and drop a standard ability at the same time, the last thing you see before the pause screen should be the ability star just beginning to leave Kirby's chubby little body. If you timed it right and you leave the stage, then when you reappear in the hub world, you'll be able to make a little water splash by pressing the attack button. It does nothing, but it's adorable, and reminds me of Magikarp. And now here's where the really cool bit comes in. If you do the same thing with... you don't seem very... excited. Doesn't everyone get excited at the words Kirby UFO? I'm sorry, I forget that not everyone adores this franchise. Objectively, it isn't really that interesting. I'm just ruining the pacing for everyone. But this ain't your retrospective, this is Alex's retrospective, so if you want to watch, you sit down, you suck it up, and you watch like the good little viewer I know you are! Ugh. Anyway, Expanded gameplay isn't the only thing this game has up its sleeve. Look at how pleasant these backdrops are. I mean, yeah, they're technically impressive considering the hardware limitations, but more importantly, they're just so nice. Look at those sunflowers. Look at that sunset. Look at this spinny building. Look at that sky blob. And all this prettiness is used in really interesting ways. The detail in the trees and the flowers and the clouds and the trees helps make progressing through a level feel truly organic. Let me explain. In the 5th level of the 5th world, for example, you start off in a forest, weaving through roots and clambering over treetops until you reach a warp star that takes you to a castle at the edge of a clearing in the middle of the forest. You enter the castle, defeat its guardian, and by the time you've come out, you're back in the forest and the sun's setting. It all happens so naturally, the level almost feels like a tiny, simplistic story. It feels less like Kirby's running through an obstacle course and more like he's, well, on an adventure. It's wonderful. Strangely, as much sense as the individual levels make, the worlds make less sense than Peter Molyneux in a maid costume.
I hope you're enjoying that mental image.
All the worlds have adorably alliterative food names, and this makes sense at first. Vegetable Valley is like a grass forest world, Ice Cream Island is a beach world, but things start shifting with the Grape Garden, which is a sky world but throws in a couple unexplainable palaces. Then there's Yogurt Yard. Tell me, Kirby, what exactly does a yard-themed level look like? That's what I thought. Then you've got Orange Ocean, which is supposedly an ocean world but has multiple ice levels, and then finally Rainbow Resort, which seems to want to be an ice world but is, as it turns out, 90s world? These inconsistencies are actually pretty charming. It's interesting to see how some games built their universes before elementally themed worlds were a firmly established thing. Firmly established indeed. And seriously, major props to the dev team for making a world with rainbow in the title that actually contains awesome rainbows on an 8-bit system. Kirby, for all his softness, really did do his damnedest to push the NES to its absolute limits. And this doesn't just shine through in the graphics department. Kirby music is some of my favorite music in the Nintendo canon. And this is the game where it started getting really good. It just makes me want to dance! The happy music is never too grating, the sleepy music is never too boring, and when it needs to be, this soundtrack can be straight up intense. That boss music just gets me going. And oh man, I've just got to talk about the bosses. Let's do a little boss comparison, huh? Exhibit A, Super Mario Bros. 3. Great game, almost perfect. Except the bosses. Jump on his head 3 times, jump on his head 3 times, jump on his head 3 times and avoid the balls, jump on her head 3 times, jump on his head 3 times. And the final boss? Wait for him to kill himself. Now look at Kirby's adventure. Highlights include fighting the sun and the moon at the same time, fighting a fucking razor blade Cyclops mech as it tunnels through the ground, fighting a ninja knight in a one-on-one sword duel, and a 3-part final boss fight that takes you to the moon. Are you seeing this shit? I mean, the game has its flaws. Yes, it's short, and the controls aren't always as responsive as I want them to be, but I'm not here to criticize Kirby. To me, Kirby's Adventure is a timeless, excellent experience. But while it's true that Kirby's Adventure was my first Kirby game, it's also true that Kirby's Adventure was not my first Kirby game. I played the Game Boy Advance remake because I'm a foolish little child who didn't start playing games until after the 90s. I missed the classics. And so I had all this Kirby enthusiasm built up inside me, but nowhere to put it because I didn't realize I could just buy a used NES or SNES and play all the past games. To me, they were like relics of a long past golden age. So what could I do? Well, if these games were ancient relics, then I had no choice but to become the archaeologist.